Welcome to my channel. Today we'll dive into the final chapters of Persephone of Eleusis. As the truth is revealed, love and honor must choose their path. In these final moments, Persephone faces a painful past. Her beloved stands trial, and one decision will change everything. This is the ending tragic, noble, and unforgettable. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Chapter 21 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Chapter 21. In the Shadow of the Acropolis. Oh, yet we trust that somehow good will be the final goal of ill, to pangs of nature, sins of will, defects of doubt, and taints of blood. Tennyson. Zopyrus bade Themistocles and Laodice farewell, and turned his footsteps absent-mindedly to the house of Pasicles. As it was still early in the afternoon, he decided to walk to the Acropolis and view again the spoils of the late war that were there on exhibition. Thinking to avoid the busy street that passes to the front of the theater of Dionysus, Zopyrus sought the shady but unfrequented side of the Acropolis. He was arrested by the sound of conversation punctuated with light laughter. Something familiar in one of the voices caused him to proceed cautiously. Seated upon a moss-grown ledge, the lofty wall of the Acropolis covered with creepers forming an artistic background, sat Corinna, daughter of Pasicles. Zopyrus gazed in mute astonishment, for this coquettish maiden seemed a new Corinna and not the sister of the serious Eumetis, or the betrothed of the artist Polygnotus. Leaning against the ledge and gazing up at the girl with steadfast attention was a florid-faced young man, a stranger to Zopyrus. The boldness of his demeanor displeased Zopyrus greatly, and he decided to remain where he was and investigate the stranger's intentions to Corinna. Covering Corinna's head was a handsome brocaded scarf. When the girl tossed back her head in laughter, the scarf slipped off and fell to the ground. The youth picked it up, shook off the dust, and restored it to its owner. Corinna joyfully received it, and warmly thanked the young man, who assured her he would delight in rendering her a real service some day. Zopyrus watched the two for some time, and was about to conclude that it was perhaps a harmless flirtation, when the man's face suddenly lost its expression of gaiety, and took on a serious aspect, while his eyes gleamed with a lustful light. "My invitation of a few minutes ago was no joke, Corinna. Will you go with me to Naxos on the second night of the next full moon? You will see the queen of all there, you beautiful girl, with your crown of auburn hair." Corinna drew away from the two ardent gestures. "No, I cannot do that. My parents, my sister, yes, and Polygnotus," she added with a blush, "would be horrified." "Do not let them know," persisted the man. "Have you not a sick friend who might be visited that night?" The maid hesitated. "Give me time to think it over. You say there will be other girls, and that the ceremonies are beautiful?" "Yes, indeed," he cried eagerly, laying a hand on hers. "There will be others, but none so lovely as you. As for the artist, he is too serious to enjoy life. With him, Corinna, you would soon become an old woman, but I am different. I enjoy life, and I can make you so happy that the festival of Dionysus will be an event in your life that you will never forget." "Well, I will try to arrange it so I can go. Where shall I meet you?" "At the harbor of Piraeus, an hour after sunrise." Zopyrus needed to hear no more. He hesitated between informing the girl's parents of what he had heard, and, on the other hand, saying nothing about it, but going to Naxos himself, unknown to her, as her guardian. After debating the problem all the way home, he decided upon the latter plan as the better, in that it might spare Pasicles and Cleodice disappointment and mortification. On the day following the events of the preceding chapter, Simon was the recipient of a message, the purport of which caused him to doubt the accuracy of his sight. The note was from Laodice, the ward of Themistocles, requesting him to meet her in the latter part of the afternoon at the mossy ledge on the east side of the Acropolis. Believing that it was all part of a dream from which he would awaken to miserable reality, Simon hurried to his trysting place with fast-beating heart. His eyesight might still be tricking him, but there standing by the ledge, her figure draped in a gown of palest blue that revealed while yet it concealed the graceful lines of her form, stood Laodice, the one being who could raise him to the heights of Olympus or plunge him to the depths of Hades. The desire to take her in his arms was controlled so that he presented a calm and dignified exterior as he approached with the words, "I am here in answer to your summons, Laodice, and I am at your service." She raised to his eyes that betrayed no emotion either of love or hatred, as she made reply, "I am here simply to say that if you will cease in your attempt to bring about the ostracism of Themistocles, and will try to undo the evil you have already committed, I will become your wife. Otherwise, my former decision concerning a marriage between us remains unchanged." Simon could no longer doubt the truth of his senses. This lovely maiden, whom he adored, was offering herself to him body and soul. But in return for what? Ah, yes, if he would discontinue his efforts to banish the one man who stood between him and the pinnacle of fame and fortune, which had but recently appeared above him as possible of access. He looked about him wildly, while for a moment his mind seemed a chaos. Athens or Laodice, a city or a maid, fame or marital bliss. He could feel the blood throbbing at his temples, while it seemed an eternity before he could speak. Around him lay the city that he loved, the city for which his father had fought and died, the home of his youth and the shelter of his maturing ambitions. Before him stood a maiden, in an attempt to rescue whom a friend had forfeited his life. Revenge toward her, because he had failed to awaken in her heart the love for which he yearned, had caused him to first listen to the words of Ephialtes. Later had come the other ambition. With a cry that expressed a realization of freedom after long confinement, Simon stepped forward and took the impassive form of Laodice in his arms. End of chapter 21.
Chapter 22 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. A letter from Sicily. How beautiful, sublimely beautiful thou hoverest high in the vacant air. Thou seemest uplifted from all of earth, and like an island floating away in heaven. How pure are the eternal snows that crown thee. James Gates Percival. Ever since Zopyrus had seen again the girl whom he had rescued from the Persian soldiery, he could think of little else. She filled his conscious thoughts, and at night he dreamed of her. But he'd made up his mind with stern resolution that he would be true to his promise to Eumetis, who seemed to love him devotedly. The wedding had been postponed from the end of the mystery celebrations to the third night of the full moon. An idea came to Zopyrus while he was in the library copying manuscripts for Pasicles, the afternoon following his eavesdropping near the Acropolis. If the marriage ceremonies were celebrated one night before, that is, on the second night of the full moon, Corinna would not go to Naxos with the stranger, for she would be obliged to attend the nuptials of her sister. The idea had just impressed him as the best way to save Corinna, when Pasicles entered the library and placed in Zopyrus' hands a missive, bearing upon its exterior the stamp of Hiero, tyrant of Syracuse. "Do you know," cried the young man with delight, "this letter is from Aeschylus. Will you not seat yourself and hear it?" "Not now," replied Pasicles. "I came only to deliver the letter into your hands and to tell you that the writing of an ode for the recent victor of the Nemean Games takes me immediately to Argolis, and I cannot possibly be back until the day of yours and Eumetis' marriage." "Oh," cried Zopyrus with unconcealed dismay, "can you not come the day before, as I wish to put the date one day ahead?" Pasicles attributed Zopyrus' disappointment to impatience for the approaching marriage to take place, and laying a fatherly hand on his shoulder, smiled as he said, "One day is short compared to eternity, my boy, and I shall have to hasten back to get here on the third night of the full moon. Farewell, and give my regards to my brother poet when you write." "One day," thought Zopyrus. "Yes, it is short compared to eternity, but sometimes one day will determine how we spend eternity." He fingered absent-mindedly the parchment which Pasicles had brought him, then broke the seal and read, "To Zopyrus, at the house of the poet Pasicles in Athens, greetings from Aeschylus at the court of Hero at Syracuse. You have been in my thoughts much of the time since I left our fair land. I've wondered how you fared at the mysteries, and if, in the joys and sorrows of Ceres and Persephone, you recognized life's pleasures and tragedies. Happy is he who has seen these things and then goes beneath the earth, for he knows the end of life and its God-given beginning. Remember, my son, that death is no ill for mortals, but rather a good. Ceres, Persephone, Ares, Athena, Aphrodite, Hera, Hermes, and all the others are merely personifications of the various aspects of divine truth and goodness, which are in reality embodied in one supreme being, of whom every star of heaven, every wave of ocean, every leaf of the forest, every blade in the meadow, every rock on the shore, every grain of sand in the desert is a manifestation. But I will not bore you with a rehearsal of my beliefs, for we shall have glorious opportunities when I return to Greece to discuss these things at length. In company with the most noble Pindar, whose lofty and dignified odes have won him considerable fame, and the venerable poet Phrynichus and Simonides, whose poem exalting the battle of Marathon took first place over mine, and the nephew of Simonides, Bacchylides, and others, I crossed the Isthmus of Corinth, where a merchant vessel awaited us in the Gulf. There was little to break the monotony of our trip through the Gulf of Corinth. We skirted the northern coast of Achaia, stopping at Patrae for more food. At noon of the third day we passed between the islands of Cephallenia and Zacynthus, and from then on for many days only the vault of the heavens and the blue expanse of the Ionian Sea met our gaze. Imagine, then, with what delight we first beheld the misty contours of land. It was not Sicily which lay before us, but the southern end of the Italian peninsula. We got no nearer than to behold it, as a long line of purple clouds, but bore on to the southward until, in the glow of a magnificent sunset, Mount Etna, like a giant clad in crimson and gold, seemed to guard the glorious panorama before us. Never, my friend, have I been so impressed with the grandeur of nature, and so it was with my friends. We stood in awe together and watched the volcano grow gradually larger and more distinct, till we could discern the little homes clustered about its sloping base, each with its patchwork of vegetable gardens about it. Above these, groves of olive trees, their grotesque trunks entwined with grapevines, flourished to add their supply of olives, oil, and wine to the rich exports of this island. Lifting our eyes still higher, we beheld another zone of vegetation, as beautiful in its way as the lower ones. This wooded belt was densely covered with evergreen pines, birchwoods, oaks, red beeches, and chestnuts, and was a veritable forest primeval. As the forest ascended the hillside, it grew thinner and more stunted in appearance, till only low shrubs marked its upper boundary, beyond which was barren rock, and then, as if Etna hoped to leave a favorable lasting impression, its snow-crowned summit stood out in dazzling relief against the roseate sky, which marked a dying day. This was truly a wonderful first impression of Sicily, but it was with no less degree of delight that we passed around the little island of Ortygia the next day, and saw for the first time the gleaming white buildings and green parkways of Syracuse. Pindar called it the fairest of mortal cities. We were warmly welcomed by Hero, whose chief avocation is the patronizing of the arts, of which music, sculpture, and painting are as highly favored as poetry. He spares no effort to make us feel that we are at liberty to discuss pro and con, any subject that may arise. So we often sit warm evenings in the garden of the palace about the silvery sprayed fountain and listen or give voice to various opinions. It has been our pleasure to visit the temple of Arethusa on the island of Ortygia, where it is said the nymph for whose worship the fane was erected was changed to a spring to escape the unwelcome attentions of the river god Alpheus, who had pursued her as she fled underground from Sicily. The city of Himera demanded some of our interest and attention, since it was the recent scene of conflict and bloodshed. Hero tells me that the Carthaginians, under the leadership of Hamilcar, were routed by the stratagem of Gelon, brother of Hero and tyrant of Syracuse before him, on the same day that the Battle of Salamis was fought. You were no doubt so interested in the affairs of Greece that the fate of her colonies was of minor importance. This was true in my case, but I have since learned that Terillus, governor of Himera, had been expelled by Theron, despot of Agrigentum, a flourishing city on the west coast. In a spirit of revenge, Terillus summoned the Phoenicians to attack Himera, but Gelon, hearing that the Carthaginians had been assured of aid by a certain traitorous Greek, sent a body of his own men to the Carthaginians as if they were the promised help. This band of Greeks turned on the Phoenicians and held them at bay till others rushed in and the city was saved. In this conflict, Hamilcar was killed. To the south lies a city that I love, Gela, named for the brave Gelon. The fields of grain and the groves by which it is surrounded were presumably the original haunts of Ceres and Persephone. It is here that I wish my earthly body to be laid at rest when the spirit has fled. What of affairs at Athens? We hear that the shrine of Apollo at Delos is the center of the new confederacy. I predict that Cimon will come to be a great representative of Hellenic unity, and he will accomplish much through the Delian League. All this will be in opposition to Themistocles' opinions, but Themistocles has had his day and must step aside for those who are younger in years and newer in ideas. I sincerely hope there is no truth in the rumor that Themistocles may be ostracized. Say a good word for him, Sir Pyrrhus, even if your views differ from his. Of one thing more I wish to speak before I conclude this letter, and that is of my son, Euphorion, at Eleusis. You remember I told you I lost a son at Thermopylae, but I did not tell you of my other son, 2 years his brother's junior. It would please me greatly to have you call and see him. I have told him of you. You will have much in common, for the lad shows the same love of poetry and philosophy that I do, and has vowed from babyhood that he will follow his father's profession. I know you would enjoy such a visit to Eleusis, especially since your initiation into the mysteries. Remember me to the noble Pasicles and his family. The length of our sojourn in Sicily has not been decided, and I shall probably write you again before I leave. If you find time, I shall be interested in hearing from you, in regard to yourself and also affairs of state. May the blessing of the One rest upon you. End of chapter 22. Read by Sandra in Canada, 2025.
Chapter 23 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Christine Rucker. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Chapter 23, The Festivities at Naxos. Now measuring forth with Attic grace, like figures round a sculptured vase, the accent of some mythic song now hurled a Bacchic group along. Aubrey de Vere. The sun was scarcely an hour above the horizon when 7 skiffs in festive regalia left the harbor of Piraeus southward bound. 6 of them were filled with youths and maidens bedecked with flowers. Across the serene blue, where scarcely a ripple was perceptible, the voices of the merrymakers floated, returning in echoes from the temples of marble gleaming white on the naked promontories. The 7th boat was laden with goats intended as sacrificial offerings to the god Dionysus at his temple on the island of Naxos. Ephialtes and Persephone, accompanied by Agne, whom Persephone has insisted upon taking as chaperone, were seated in the foremost vessel.
Persephone sat at the prow, gazing across the waters. Her tunic and skirt were of pale blue, trimmed with golden brocade of an intricate pattern. Her brown gold hair lay in waves over her temples, which were encircled by a plain gold band, from which hung a chaplet of sapphires lying on her forehead. To Ephialtes she had never appeared more beautiful. He thought of the evening that they had glided in this manner off Salamis. He intended to ask her the same question, hoping she had long since forgotten the request she had made of him. He turned frequently with this ill-concealed annoyance towards Agne, who sat at Persephone's left. Ephialtes felt that now, as in the mystery drama they were Hades, Ceres, and Persephone, that Ceres strove to keep her daughter under her protection, and like Hades, he desired to snatch her from the maternal arms and keep her for his own. He did not know that Agne's advice had been favorable to his suit. Had he been acquainted with this fact, he might have been more tolerant of the older woman. As the afternoon wore on, a light breeze stirred the waters into wavelets which gently lapped the shores of various islands of the Cyclades which they had passed. Islands filled with the sanctuaries and fanes of white marble which gleamed ghost-like in the gathering dusk. At length the moon loomed colossal beyond the island of Paros, throwing up contours into misty and spectral relief, and softening all things with its touch of silver. The festive boats passed Paros, with its temple to Poseidon, the occupants gazing ahead in eager anticipation till the rocky promontories of Naxos arose darkly from the pathway of phosphorescence. Then, with one impulse from every throat, burst the hymn to Dionysus. Nearer and nearer came the celebrants. Loftier grew the cliffs of the island, and louder echoed the paean, until at last the boats drew up one by one in a sheltered cove. Dense foliage grew close to the steep pathway, the ascent of which was facilitated by steps cut in the soil or formed naturally by the exposed roots of trees. Through the branches, the newcomers could see the lights twinkling as people passed to and fro. Then the white columns and the pleasing proportions of the temple came into view. Persephone, Ephialtes, and Agne were the first arrivals of the first boat, and made their way unhindered to the temple which they entered, mingling with the delirious throng whose acclamations rang through the great hall. It seemed to the arrivals from Athens that every inhabitant of Naxos was here celebrating. A great gong silenced the sound of talking and laughter after all the Athenians had arrived. A curtain at the edge of the cella dropped, revealing the image of the god of wine and revelry, and immediately a hymn of praise was sung, following which the sacrifice of a goat was consummated at the feet of the idol. Night was turned into day, wine flowed freely, and many a youth's spirits rose in proportion to the amount of wine he imbibed. To all this revelry, Persephone and Agne were horrified witnesses. They had heard that Dionysus was worshipped with much rejoicing, especially at his temple at Naxos, but they had not had occasion to realize to what depths his worshippers sometimes fell. The two women looked furtively about, seeking some way in which they might escape unobserved to the boats, where for a few drachmas a couple of rowers would take them back to the mainland. They crouched near a pillar, watching with increasing terror wine-filled creatures who caroused around them. Many a youth lounged upon a couch or the flower-strewn floor, his head in some fair one's lap. Ephialtes made his way with unsteady step to where the two women cowered. The Greek blood which ran in his veins preserved his grace even in drunkenness. Laughingly he held toward each a goblet of sparkling wine, which they declined. In provocation, he accidentally spilled the contents of the cup proffered to Persephone. For an instant he stood dismayed, watching the blood-like liquid as it flowed over the marble floor. Then, with frenzied determination, he forced between the lips of Agnes the wine contained in the other goblet, after which he stood swaying unsteadily with folded arms, a sinister smile curling his handsome lips. Persephone determined to flee, but she did not want to leave Agnes at the mercies of the drunken brutes around them. Come, come, Agnes, she whispered wildly. You and I never dreamed what would be the nature of this celebration. Oh, Agnes! The older woman made an attempt to answer and even to rise to her feet, but in vain. In another instant she sank in a pitiful heap, apparently lifeless. Persephone's temples throbbed with angry passion as she turned towards Ephialtes. There was a narcotic in that wine. I am glad mine was spilled. There was no drug in yours, Persephone. I did not bring you here to put you to sleep. It is a living maiden I want, cried the young Greek passionately. He lurched toward her to take her in his arms, but she eluded his grasp, and he found himself embracing the fluted pillar near which she had sat. A chance observer roared with laughter, and calling in his companions cried, A king of revelers here, my friends. What do you say to crowning him as Bacchus? Down with the god of stone, and up with one of flesh and blood. So saying, he and his male companions ran to the throne where the stone Dionysus sat. With unnatural strength due to the freeness of their imbibing, they tore the god from his throne and forced the half-reluctant Ephialtes upon it. The wreath of grape leaves which had adorned the head of Dionysus was rudely snatched from it and placed upon the young man's curls. After Ephialtes was ceremoniously enthroned, someone cried out, Where is Ariadne? Bacchus must have his Ariadne. Where did she go? Bring her back. This appeal was answered by a rapturous shout, and several youths started in pursuit, returning shortly, dragging Persephone with them. Bacchus shows good taste, cried one. She is surely a rival of the maiden whom Theseus deserted on these very shores. Up with her, cried another. She must occupy the throne with him. She shall be his queen. That she shall, cried Ephialtes, his courage returning as he beheld the beautiful frightened face of the girl whom he loved. He stooped from the throne and lifted in his arms the form of the now unconscious girl. Across her marble white forehead strands of loosened hair streamed. The soft blue light from the circlet of sapphires which lay on her cold brow contrasted strangely with the ruddy brilliance of the ruby clasp which adorned the hair of Ephialtes above his passion-flushed countenance. He received a goblet of wine which had been proffered to him and put it to the lips of the fainting maiden. The draught brought her back to consciousness, and she gazed dazedly about. Then suddenly the horror of her situation came upon her. With an agonized cry, she rose to flee, but was seized roughly by Ephialtes, who, impassioned, leaned over her, covering her face and throat with burning kisses. End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Chapter 24. Dionysus and Ariadne. Far in the east the Aegean twinkles, and its 1,000 isles hover in mist, and round the dun horizon are many floating visions, clouds or peaks tinted with rose. James Gates Percival. The second day of the full moon arrived. All necessary preparations had been made for the marriage ceremony of Eumetis and Zopyrus, which would take place on the following day. Corinna approached her mother as the latter stood near the altar of Zeus in conversation with the prospective bride and bridegroom. "Mother," said the girl, "I've just learned that my dear friend Gorgo is ill and wishes me to go immediately and spend the night with her. I will be back for the wedding tomorrow." Cleodace's eyes shone with maternal approval as she surveyed the eager, youthful face so like her own. "What will Polygnotus say?" asked Eumetus. "Oh, he will recover from the effects of one evening spent outside of my presence," replied her sister indifferently. Zopyrus stood silently by. He had been grievously disappointed and shocked at Corinna's duplicity, and had hoped that before the fateful day arrived, she would repent of her former decision and abandon the proposed trip to Naxos with the stranger. However, her present conversation with Cleodace assured him that she hung tenaciously to her original purpose. "By all means, spend the night with your sick friend, Corinna," said a voice from the entryway, and, turning, the four beheld the young artist who had heard the conversation unobserved by the others. Zopyrus greeted Polygnotus heartily. He thought, at first, to apprise him secretly of Corinna's proposed trip to Naxos, but, upon second thought, he decided that there might be a better way of preventing the girl from committing such a folly without grieving her lover. The deep, sincere eyes of the artist rested a moment in loving regard upon the face of Corinna, who flushed deeply, turning demurely away. Her mother and sister each placed an arm lovingly about her, and the three women left the atrium. When they were gone, Polygnotus turned enthusiastically to Zopyrus and said, "I have good news. Cimon has just been made commander of the fleet and is contemplating visiting Sparta with Alcmaeon in behalf of the alleged confederacy. Your news is pleasing to my ear, and I rejoice with you and Cimon, but—" Zopyrus glanced about and lowered his voice to a whisper. "Will you not speak well to Cimon of Themistocles, and ask him to do his utmost to put down this charge of Medism against the statesman?" "I will do what I can," replied Polygnotus. "Cimon is more a warrior than a statesman. His methods are direct and bold, often, sadly, lacking in diplomacy. He believes that when a man has served his purpose in life and is no longer useful to the community in which he dwells, and may even become a detriment to those whom he once served, he should be cast aside as one would shed a worn garment when its season of beauty and service is past. Cimon, and others like him, also believe that when maturity of age is past, and the power of decision begins to wane, the very burden of long experience perplexes the mind and engenders doubt and fear instead of confidence. Will you come with me this evening to the home of Cimon to congratulate him upon his success, and to speak a good word for Themistocles? But I had forgotten. Tomorrow you will wed, and possibly you have arrangements to make in regard to the ceremonies. Corinna and I are to follow your example before long, but Cleodace does not wish to lose two daughters at once, and Eumetus is the older. I am delighted to hear that your marriage will take place soon. I must be going now, as I have a duty to fulfill," said Zopyrus, as he turned to go. Not long after this conversation, a chance observer might have seen a young man of aristocratic bearing, crisp blonde curls, and noble face, walking with elastic strides toward Piraeus. He was clad in the short dress of a laborer, called an exomis, and upon his head was a narrow-brimmed, close-fitting cap. As he neared the harbor, he proceeded cautiously, desirous of observing all that was taking place without being seen. To his consternation, he saw that 3 boats with their occupants had already been launched upon the sea. Vexed with himself for having arrived so late, he scanned the people who remained upon the shore waiting to be assigned to other boats. It was almost unbelievable, but it was true. The sun unmistakably revealed a head of auburn hair, and close to it the bullet head and thick florid neck of a young man. Zopyrus, for it was he who, clad in the woolen exomis instead of his customary linen chiton, watched the 2 closely, pulled the brim of his cap well over his eyes, and approached the waiting youths and maidens. Several he recognized as the sons and daughters of prominent Athenians. Another filled boat was leaving, the rowers diligently plying the oars. It was apparent that Corinna and the heavy-set youth would be of the number to fill the next boat. Disguising his walk, Zopyrus made his way quickly to the waiting skiff, and approached one of the oarsmen. 10 drachmas for you, if you will let me take your place at the oars, he said in a low tone. The fellow looked amazed, prepared to turn his back upon Zopyrus, then suddenly thought better of the offer. He put forth his hand, and when, to his surprise, the coins fell into his upturned palm, he sprang free of his seat and ran to the shore, leaving his place at the oars free to the generous stranger. Zopyrus took the vacant place, and had not long to wait before the young people filled the waiting boat. In unison with his fellow oarsmen, Zopyrus assailed the task briskly, and soon the graceful little skiff was well out into the harbor. The first boat was a mere speck near the horizon to the south, as the one in which Corinna was a passenger emerged from the entrance of the harbor. Zopyrus was grateful for the opportunity for strenuous physical exercise. It took his mind off of his own sorrow. He realized presently that he was listening unconsciously to the conversation of 2 men. What did you say were the names of the 7 boats that left for Naxos? Asked one. They are named for 7 goddesses or nymphs, replied the other. Doris, Leucothea, Metis, Egle, Amphitrite, Doto, and Persephone. This one is the Persephone. Zopyrus let his oars drift when he heard the last statement. Was the vision or name of Persephone to haunt him throughout life? When he was on land, the leaves on the trees seemed to whisper, Persephone. And now, on the water, the boat in which he sat bore her name, and the ripples that washed its sides murmured the beloved accents. The afternoon wore on. The sun's rays became more slanting, and the boats glided across the water like silent spirits. At length, night descended upon the water, but no, it was growing brighter. Where but a few moments before the hills of distant Paros had slept on the edge of the darkness, now curve on curve was silhouetted against the silvery light of the moon, and the ripple of the oars on the water made a sheet of phosphorescence in its shadowy depths. When Paros was past, from across the water there floated on the gentle breeze the Dionysian hymn, sung by the occupants of the 4 preceding boats. Those in the Persephone joined in the chant, and Zopyrus heard Corinna's pure, soft tones mingling strangely with the harsh notes of her companion. As the prow touched the bank, Zopyrus sprang from his seat, eager to set foot on land, but he was checked by the glances of indignant remonstrance cast upon him not only by his fellow oarsmen, but by the others as well. He turned his face quickly into the shadow, fearing to be recognized by some of the youths and maidens of Athens, but his fears proved groundless. After the boat had been emptied of the Bacchanalians, Zopyrus quietly stepped ashore, sauntering leisurely till beyond the range of vision of the oarsmen, who, if they intended observing the rites of Bacchus, preferred to bide their time. Once out of their sight and hearing, Zopyrus quickened his pace, keeping well protected by the bushes and tree trunks that lined the path, till he paused in awe, as there appeared in a clearing to the left before him the white Ionic columns and chaste lines of the temple to Dionysus. Alas, that its spotless purity was defiled by the wild orgies within! Its portals were thronged with gay devotees, and the sound of laughter and singing blended with the tones of flute and barbiton. By now indifferent to his plebeian dress, Zopyrus traversed the moonlit sward to the temple and mingled with the light-hearted revelers. Groups of celebrants raised their voices in jubilant song, but here and there, detached couples, their faces stamped with passion and lust, made horrible the scene. Now and then a hetera with appealing glance passed close to where Zopyrus stood like a statue, too horrified to move. The muscles of his mouth were drawn, and his face was haggard. He suffered complete inertia till the sight of a girl who reminded him of Corinna aroused him from his lethargic state, and he set out to find her before it was too late. For he knew that she had been ignorant of the nature of the revelries. He pressed on down the length of the cella, scrutinizing the face of every maiden, but he did not see Corinna. As he neared the throne of Dionysus, the sound of triumphant acclamations poured from the throats of 100 devotees and bacchantes who stood about the throne fell upon his ears. He pushed his way nearer to the front, receiving many rebuffs and scornful glances because of his mean attire. "What is the excitement?" he asked of a young man. "You can see for yourself," was the surly reply. "Dionysus has turned to flesh and blood, and shares the throne with Ariadne." Zopyrus forced his way onward till he could see the throne. He stood a moment as if petrified. Then, with a few swift strides, he was alone before the royal seat, gazing with death-white countenance at Dionysus and Ariadne. End of chapter 24. Read by Phineas, Denver, Colorado. Chapter 25 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Chapter 25. A Revelation. Bacchus! Bacchus on the panther, he swoons, bound with his own vines, and his Maenads slowly saunter, head aside, among the pines, while they murmur dreamingly, "Euoi! Ah, Euoi! Ah, Pan is dead." Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Zopyrus stood with arms folded, his noble head, perfect stature, and dignified bearing appearing most incongruous with the exomus he wore. From across his folded arms he looked straight at the mortal Dionysus, till the latter, feeling his impelling gaze, looked up and flushed guiltily, though the man who surveyed him so coldly was to him a total stranger. Zopyrus walked to the throne, thrust the false Dionysus rudely aside, seized the amazed Persephone in his arms, and tried to force his way through the crowd with her. But the indignant remonstrances of the crowd made futile his efforts. "Down with him for violating the privileges of the god!" cried one. This outburst was followed with vociferous cries of, "Take Ariadne from him! Throw him out! Beat him!" By this time, Ephialtes had recovered his composure. The appearance of the stranger had inexplicably discomposed him, and the attack had roused his ire. But now, conscious of his costly garb in contrast to his assailant's attire, he stood before the throne and, in imperious tones, demanded the return of Ariadne, as he called her. Zopyrus released the girl from his embrace and asked, "Do you wish to return to Pluto?" For answer, she stepped closely to Zopyrus' side and clung tenaciously to his arm. He gazed long into the depths of eyes that matched the blue of her gown and the sapphires upon her brow. The color mounted to her temples, and, as she bowed her head, he noticed that the rosy flush likewise suffused her neck and shoulders, which were partially visible through the golden strands of loosened hair. Ephialtes was infuriated by Persephone's refusal to return to him, and was nonplussed as to what method he had best employ to obtain the maiden, when there flashed through his mind the words of a sentence. "On the day that you deliver to Greece the traitor of Thermopylae, I will become your wife." Straightening himself to his full height, Ephialtes commanded the attention of the audience. "I am about to make a revelation that will return Ariadne to me, I believe," he said, smiling with arrogant confidence. "The man to whom Ariadne clings and is no doubt one of our oarsmen is no other than he who betrayed your country to the Persians before the battle of Thermopylae. Greece has long sought him, fellow countrymen, and yonder he stands, defiling with his touch the maiden who plays the part of Persephone at the mysteries of Eleusis. What will you do with him?" "Kill him!" came the cry from hundreds of throats, and with one accord the angry mob rushed toward Zopyrus. "Just one moment, please," said Ephialtes. "I will wait for Ariadne, or Persephone of Eleusis, to join me on the throne." He paused impressively, but Persephone did not move. "What?" he cried in indignation. "Did you not promise to become my bride when Thermopylae's traitor would be revealed by me?" Persephone walked slowly toward Ephialtes, who stretched forth eager arms to receive her, but she stopped a few paces before him, and on her face was an inscrutable smile. "Not so fast, Ephialtes. I want the proof. You dare not make such a statement without sufficient evidence against him." Ephialtes was confused. He had not had enough time to make up false testimony, but he knew that his future happiness depended now upon how successfully he placed the blame of his guilt upon the innocent man before him. "Hear me," he said, "and I will tell you the circumstances." "Your testimony can avail not, for my protector here is a native Persian who knows nothing of the mountain passes of Greece. said Persephone in a voice that rang clearly as a bell through the great hall. A death-like stillness pervaded the cella. Naught was heard but the sharp intake of Ephialtes' breath. Then from his lips there burst in stentorian tones, "If this be true, a Persian in our midst is as deserving of death as a traitor. Friends, will you allow him even so much as to touch the Persephone of the mysteries?" At this, Persephone became alarmed, and feared lest in her ardent desire to defend her protector, she had only made matters worse. Zopyrus, seeing her agitated countenance, smiled reassuringly, and raised his arm to command general attention. A few rabid revelers rushed forward to do violence to his person, but were checked by a voice in the throng. "Hear him! No man should be condemned without being permitted to say a word in his own behalf." The furious denunciations of the intolerant ones subsided, and Zopyrus turned and walked slowly toward Ephialtes, who gradually retreated before the compelling gaze of his antagonist, till he reached the throne upon which he sat, quite unconscious of what he did. Zopyrus' demeanor changed instantly. He bowed low before the amazed man upon the throne and said with impressive solemnity, "O Xerxes, king of the Medes and Persians, and would-be conqueror of the world, I come to you with an important message. For 2 days your soldiers have been defeated by the Greeks at the entrance of the pass of Thermopylae. The Greeks are so inferior in number that right now is the time to strike, but not in the method heretofore employed. The Greeks are well trained, and if they are to be conquered, it must be by the greater forces of the enemy. Listen, O Xerxes, if you would succeed in overwhelming the enemy, you must attack from behind, but this you cannot do since you are not acquainted with this wild, impassable country. I am a native Malian, and well acquainted with this locality. If you will make it worth my while, I will show you a mountain pass that will lead you to the rear of Leonidas' army, unobserved." During the Persian's recital, Ephialtes' behavior had undergone many mutations. From startled curiosity to fearful apprehension, thence to genuine fright, and finally to abject terror, his demeanor had rapidly changed. By the time the Persian had ceased speaking, the Greek's face was as livid as a corpse. Zopyrus sprang to the side of the doomed man and, clutching him by either shoulder, cried, "Speak, traitor of Thermopylae! What have you to say for yourself?" For answer, Ephialtes drew from the folds of his robe a ruby-handled dagger, which he raised for a death-dealing thrust at Zopyrus. But the latter, free from the influence of wine, was the quicker, and caught his enemy's arm in its lightning-like descent, thus warding off the blow that might have been fatal. A muttering that grew to a rumble, and then to a mighty roar that shook the very pillars of the temple was heard, and with one impulse an angry mob rushed toward the dais. Above the din and confusion, a voice screamed, "Death to the traitor who opened the gateway to Greece! Upon his head and no other rests the loss of our homes and the deaths of our fathers and brothers." Zopyrus drew the half-fainting form of Persephone to his side, and with one strong arm gave her bodily support, and with the other forced a passage through the enraged crowd down the length of the cella. At the door, they turned and looked back toward the throne, which was completely hidden from their sight by the oscillating wave of humanity which hovered about it and its ill-fated occupant. Shuddering with horror, they rushed out into the darkness. The cool breeze from across the water revived their benumbed senses. As they sped along the pathway which led to the shore, the drunken figure of a man emerged from the clump of bushes to their left. Zopyrus would have ordinarily paid no heed, as the man was in type a duplicate of hundreds of others within the temple, but something familiar in the drunkard's appearance caused him to pause and take a second look, and in doing so, he recognized beyond the question of a doubt the course companion of Corina. His conscience smote him as he remembered that, although he had come to Naxos for the very purpose of serving as Corina's protector, he had abandoned her to whatever fate might befall when he had seen Persephone in distress. He seized Persephone's hand and said hastily, "Come with me, we must find Corina." "Do you mean Corina, the daughter of the poet Pasicles?" asked Persephone. "The same," he replied. "Do you know her?" The girl nodded. The young man continued talking as they hurried on in the direction whence the rough man had appeared. "She came to Naxos in the company of that brutish-looking man we met, and I intended to protect her. But you know the result. When I saw you, you were in dire need of help, and I could no more have left you to suffer at the hands of that traitor than I did that day on the Acropolis when the Persian Artabazus would have harmed you." He turned half timidly to her, ashamed of his adoration for her whom he now had no right to desire, for the image of a pure and noble maiden stood between them. "Tell me how you knew Ephialtes to be the man who betrayed Greece at Thermopylae," she asked. Zopyrus related in detail the episode of his eavesdropping in the tent of Xerxes, and Persephone was about to tell why Ephialtes had been so eager to accuse someone of being the traitor at Thermopylae, when a white form, partially concealed by undergrowth a few paces before them, attracted their attention simultaneously. Zopyrus sprang ahead and dropped to his knees beside the prone figure of a girl, which he discovered lay in the stillness of death. Something cold seemed to grip his heart, and everything about him seemed to melt into a whirling cloud. With a faint cry of anguish, he lost consciousness, just as Persephone ran up to him. She bent over him and looked into the lifeless face of the girl. It was Corina, the daughter of Pasicles. End of chapter 25. Read by Phineas, Denver, Colorado. Chapter 26 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Chapter 26. The Home of Aeschylus. Gone, and the light gone with her, and left me in shadow here. Tennyson. The god Hymen did not have charge of the ceremonies at the home of Pasicles. The goddess Mors officiated in his stead. Corina was laid away in her eternal rest, and the house and garden that had often echoed the sound of her gay laughter were silent. Even the boy Mimnermus tiptoed about in awful solitude, gravely impressed by this his first experience with death. Polygnotus was a daily visitor, whose calm dignity, combined with his kindly sympathy, made him an ever welcome one. For Zopyrus, he felt a genuine love, which had but recently developed from his former fellowship and friendly regard. One an artist, the other a poet by natural inclination, they understood each other upon the ground of their common adoration for all that was beautiful and true and good, whether represented by picture or by word. One day, several weeks after the tragic occurrences at Naxos, Zopyrus happened to come upon the letter which his beloved friend Aeschylus had written him from Sicily, and it reminded him of the poet's request that he visit his young son at Eleusis. So, without further delay, he set out mounted upon a richly caparisoned steed, lent him for the occasion by Cimon. As he passed through the Dipylon gate, he became aware for the first time that heavy storm clouds were rapidly gathering ahead of him. But having arrived thus far on his journey, he did not wish to return. The broad road that always stretched peacefully into the distance a winding silver band was now hazy with whirling eddies of dust, and the usually tranquil branches of the olive trees on either side were bending and swaying under the force which Boreas exerted upon them. The storm with all its fury did not burst upon him till he had passed the fountain of Callichoros, at which place he might have secured shelter. With his eyes on distant Eleusis, he pressed on toward his goal, gradually becoming unmindful of his soaking garments and of the fact that a numbness was taking possession of his faculties. Aeschylus had once described his home to Zopyrus as being the first abode west of the great temple, and Zopyrus gasped with delight as the classical outlines of a home typical of the upper-class citizen of Attica burst upon his sight. A high wall enclosing a garden space lay between the temple precinct and the home of the poet. As he entered the gate, a life-size statue of the goddess Demeter, bearing in her arm a sheaf of corn, stood at the edge of the garden to his right, and nearby, in marble, stood the cheerful, fun-loving figure of the faithful Iambe, who sought to alleviate her mistress's sorrow. But that which caught his eye and held it was a fountain in the center of which was a most artistic composition representing the rape of Persephone. The faces chiseled in the cold marble were so like the faces of Ephialtes and Persephone that Zopyrus stood spellbound, unmindful of the fact that a slave was approaching him and bidding him enter, saying that his horse would be placed at once in the stable. Zopyrus approached the door and found himself gazing into the half-curious, half-laughing face of a lad of 16, who said, while he gripped Zopyrus' arm heartily, "I know who you are, for father told me you were coming. But pray, why did you choose such a day as this in which to pay a call? I take it that you are Euphorion, the son of my most esteemed friend. I did not expect the storm to break so soon, or I should not have undertaken the trip." Euphorion surveyed his guest's wet garments with disfavor. "You must get into dry clothes," he said. "You are shuddering now with the cold. Lycambus," he called to a servant, "take this man to my father's room, and give him dry clothing." Zopyrus emerged from the upper chamber, dry, but not comfortable, for his head felt as though a fire burned in his brain, while his hands and feet were numb. Euphorion had disappeared, and, in his stead, a young girl in white sat on the edge of the marble basin of a fountain, industriously engaged in a work of embroidery. She looked up as Zopyrus entered, and the latter, as his eyes rested on her, thought he must be suffering delirium, for it seemed he beheld Persephone. Zopyrus moistened his lips, and he cleared his throat so that his voice would be audible. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" he asked, scarcely above a whisper. The girl laughed coyly, and toyed for a moment with her piece of fancy work, while Zopyrus advanced toward her a step. Then she raised her blue eyes, in whose depths Zopyrus read the same love message that he had at Salamis and at the Mysteries. I am exactly who I appear to be, she said. I am Persephone of Eleusis. This is my home, and Zopyrus, eyes bright with the unnatural luster of a fever, echoed her words as she finished. Aeschylus is my father. She threw back her head and tossed her curls, and before she realized what was about to happen, Zopyrus held her in his arms, kissing her again and again, the while he murmured, I love you, Persephone, but I am a Persian and must return to the encampment at Phalerum. Salamis is saved. Listen to the hymn to Dionysus. Can you find your way in safety to your people? Hear the chant. Persephone felt his hold upon her relax, and though she tried to keep him from falling, he slipped from her grasp and sank, unconscious, to the floor. Euphorion! Euphorion! Screamed the terrified girl. He is ill! Call Lycambus, and together you must carry him to father's chamber, and there make him comfortable till I can summon a physician. His exposure to the storm and the shock of finding Persephone and learning her identity had proved too much for Zopyrus in his state of mental depression and low ebb of vitality due to the Nachian tragedy. For days he laid upon the couch of Aeschylus, alternating between chills and raging fever. In his delirium he raved, and his listeners wondered at the names of Persephone and Eumetis heard interchangeably to fall from his lips. Pasicles, Cleodice, and Eumetis were frequent visitors till the crisis was past, and Zopyrus was a convalescent. Upon one occasion, a few days before Zopyrus expected to be able to undertake the journey back to Athens, he and Persephone were seated in the garden. The statues of Ceres and Iambe stood in their accustomed places, but the Hades and Persephone had disappeared. Zopyrus asked no question, for he felt that Persephone was fully justified in her dislike for that particular work of art, beautiful though it was. Tell me, he said, as they gazed across the ivy-colored wall to where the sun's rays illumined the top of the temple. Is your name really Persephone, or are you so called because of your part in the mysteries? My parents named me Persephone, hoping even at my birth that someday I would play the part of Persephone in the temple. I have fulfilled their hopes in that respect. You are adorable in the part, little Persephone, and sometime a real Pluto will come and carry you off to his realm if I... That is, sometime... Oh, Persephone, I have no right to say it, but I adore you. And if you will consent to marry me, I will arrange other matters that might interfere. I believe I know the other matters, Zopyrus, said the girl, not daring to meet his gaze. Eumetis loves you, and there has been some understanding between you. Go to her. But, oh, my dear, how can I stand it? Yet, I have said it. Go and keep your vows to her. She will make you a good wife. A good wife, groaned Zopyrus in mental agony. I don't want a good wife. I want the woman whom I love, heart and soul. He rose, and, though weak and unsteady of step, he advanced toward her with outstretched arms, but she evaded his touch. Think, Zopyrus, she entreated. Can you not recall your advances of love to Eumetis? They were promises, and must not be broken. He stood with head bent upon his breast, and hands clenched, till the nails pierced his palms. When he looked up, his passion-distorted features were calm, and his voice was steady. You are right. My first duty is the happiness of the pure girl who lost her sister through my neglect. And you, Persephone, His voice and features again showed deep agitation. "Do not know that you lost a brother, not through my neglect, but by my intention. Your brother fell at Thermopylae, pierced by my sword. The first time I ever saw you, I knew that you were his sister." "Phylis!" cried the poor girl, raising tear-dimmed eyes to heaven. "My twin brother! Why did your spirit not warn me that this man who dared to think of me in love was your murderer?" "Not murderer," cried Zopyrus in deep anguish. "Do not say that. I did it in the heat of battle and in self-defense. I am no murderer, and my conscience does not reproach me for what happened at Thermopylae. Listen, Persephone." But he stood in the garden alone. End of chapter 26. Read by Phineas, Denver, Colorado.
Chapter 27 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Chapter 27, The Allied Fleet Sails. And still from morn till eve I've scanned that weary sea from strand, to mark his sail against the spray. In vain, the morning ray shows not his bark mid all the seas. Thomas Davidson. The opportunity for meetings between Cimon and Ladice had been very rare, since the former wished, as far as possible, to avoid meeting Themistocles. The young man had conscientiously endeavored to rectify the harm that he had done against the older man, but the populace preferred to believe the evil charge, which was still vigorously promoted by Leobotes and other newly won conspirators. One afternoon Cimon walked briskly into the curio shop of Ephobus. The little merchant was dusting with loving care delicate faces in ivory and bronze of intricate designs. "This vase," he said, picking up a small urn in terracotta with figures and designs painted in black, "has depicted upon it in minutest detail the story of the siege of Troy. Here we see Paris presenting Aphrodite with the apple. There he is carrying away the beautiful Helen. And here," he added delightedly, "is the wooden horse of Ulysses. How very—" "I did not come here to discuss the Trojan War," said Cimon abruptly. "I came to find out if there is any truth to the rumor that Themistocles has disappeared." Before Ephobus could reply, the entrance to the shop was darkened by another figure. Both men, upon looking up, perceived it to be Lysimachus, son of Aristides. "Have you heard the news?" he cried, and upon receiving negative responses, continued. "Themistocles has left Greece, and it is believed that he has gone to Persia." Cimon could venture no response, but he listened dully to the details as related by the son of Themistocles' former rival. But one question kept throbbing in his brain. Will she marry me now that Themistocles is gone? He realized presently that Lysimachus was addressing him personally. "I hear that the Allied fleet leaves tomorrow on its first expedition since the formation of the Delian Confederacy, with you as its commander, in which capacity you succeed my father. Yes, we set sail on the morrow for Thrace to free from Persian rule the town of Eion on the river Strymon." Ephobus gazed with approbation at the manly form of Cimon. "I have known you since you were a little boy," he said, "and I am proud to see you the first man in Athens. This expedition is a noble enterprise, but take care that while you are gone, others right here in the city do not arise to seek your position. I have in mind a certain youth named Pericles. To be sure, he is not the soldier that you are, but he is a patron of the arts and is interested in beautifying Athens, as very little of that has been done since the war. I do not fear Pericles, answered Cimon. Athens is more interested at present in the results of the recent formation of the Delian League, which pertain more directly to our colonies. After these troubles are settled, there will be time for the future rebuilding of the city. Cimon took his leave of Aphobus and Lysimachus, and had gone but a few steps when he met Leobotes. He wished to hurry on after a short nod of greeting, but Leobotes stopped him with the words, Congratulations, Cimon. Themistocles has fled, and now there is none before you in Athens. In my opinion, Themistocles is fortunate to be away from the immediate influence of the intrigues of certain so-called loyal citizens. The fate of Ephialtes should prove a warning to such, with which words he walked away from Leobotes, who was too much astonished to reply. At last he had opportunity to think. So the fiery statesman Themistocles was gone, and he, Cimon, had been instrumental in bringing this about. Well, he knew that he had done his utmost to prevent this toward the last. He had humbled himself that Themistocles might not be thought guilty of treason, and all this was for the purpose of obtaining the girl he loved. He realized that whether by force of will or unconsciously, he was drawing nearer and nearer to the home of Themistocles. He paused before the entrance, ascended the steps, and lifted the bronze knocker. There was no response, so he gently pushed open the door and entered. All was still. He proceeded cautiously to the solarium and found it empty, but from this room the faint sound of voices came to his listening ear. They proceeded from the garden, so thither he betook himself. From the top of a short flight of stone steps which led to the garden, he surveyed the abundance of plants and shrubbery which he thought surpassed even those in the garden of Pasicles. He caught sight of two female figures seated upon a bench at the farther end of the garden. They were Ladice and Asia, the youngest daughter of Themistocles. The girls seemed to be indulging in mutual consolation. A vague uneasiness that foreboded no good hovered about Cimon as he approached with the words, Do I intrude? Ladice shook her head while Asia arose, hastily excused herself, and entered the house. Cimon took the place that Asia had occupied and said gently, Ladice, you cannot believe how I regret what has happened. Believe that I did all within my power to prevent this ever since our meeting in the shadow of the Acropolis. I have come to take you with me, Ladice. I sail in the morning for Thrace. And you will go alone, she replied, drawing away from him. Do you think for one moment that I will be the wife of the man who helped to cause the ruin of one whose home has sheltered me for many months? You failed in accomplishing your part of the agreement. I do not have to abide by mine. Simon's face grew pale, and his jaw acquired the peculiar set appearance of indomitability. The trouble with me, he cried, is that I have been too gentle, too lenient with you. My patience is exhausted, and I am going to take you by force. He caught her and held her close, though she struggled to free herself from his almost brutal kisses. I am going to take you as the men of the mountain countries take their wives, he whispered fiercely, and she felt his hot breath upon her cheek. Frantically she struggled to gain her freedom, succeeding at times in striking sharp blows upon his face, but still he held her in a vice-like grip. Her desperate struggles merely strengthened his determination to conquer her, but when she realized the impotence of her resistance, she resorted to the use of the most effective weapon a woman can employ. In scathing tones, she reminded him of the dissipations of his youth, of the disgrace of his father, and ended with a direct accusation of the ostracism of Themistocles. thus denying any belief in the assurances with which he had opened conversation with her upon entering the garden. Suddenly his hold relaxed. He pushed her from him and arose from the bench, and there was a cold glint in the eyes that a moment before had burned with the light of desire. "Very well," he said, and his tones were clearly cut and even. "The fair Agariste, to whom my attentions are not unwelcome, will accompany me to Thrace." He turned and left her, a pitiful, drooping figure. Her posture remained the same for some moments after he had gone, and so preoccupied was she that she did not hear Asia re-enter the garden and seat herself beside her. "My poor dear girl, that man is a brute," remarked Asia indignantly. "At any rate, you can rejoice that he will molest you no more. I could not help hearing some of the things he said, and I hope he and his Agariste will meet no delays in getting away from Athens. Why do you not laugh at your good fortune, foolish girl? One would think from your crestfallen appearance that you loved the man." Ladice looked up and smiled faintly through her tears as she said, "Asia, I believe I do." "You do love him? That beast makes three-headed Cerberus look like a lamb," cried Asia. "Ladice, you must be crazy. Grief over my poor father and the excitement of the past hour have unbalanced your mind. Come, let me get you to bed, though there is yet another hour before set of sun." "No, Asia, I could not rest," said the grief-stricken girl. "Please leave me. The garden is so beautiful, and I wish to be alone with my thoughts." Asia left her reluctantly, making her promise to retire early. Once more alone, Ladice marveled at the change that had come over her. From a cold, indifferent girl she had changed into a passionate, loving woman. The love must have come when she lay helpless in his arms, she reasoned, but it was not a vital thing till he spoke the words that stung her pride. How different was this love from that which she had felt for the Persian Mecistius! That had been like a clear and steady light. This was a fire that leaped wildly while it consumed. At times she smiled at the memory of his kisses, then clenched her hands as she thought of the unknown Agariste. Darkness fell, but she took no food, and worn out with weeping, she dropped into a dreamless sleep. She awoke with a sense of depression. It was dawn, and birds were twittering in their nests about her. It was apparent from the silence that the household was still wrapped in slumber. Gathering her shawl more closely about her, she made her way cautiously through the house to the street. Along narrow lanes she threaded her way with unnatural rapidity. She ran between mud-colored walls that rose on either side, punctuated with doors out of which stared disheveled women. Piles of rotting garbage lay in her path, and she was forced to dodge now this way, now that, to avoid the slinking forms of dogs that were seeking food among the piles of refuse. As she neared the vicinity of the harbor, she met men and women who looked at her curiously. Then she realized what an aspect she presented, wild-eyed and with unkempt hair, but she cared not for her appearance. She was obsessed with one idea, to present herself a willing companion to Simon on his journey. On the quay she approached a woman, apparently of the upper class, who with many others was gazing steadfastly out at sea, with the words, "When does the fleet sail for Thrace?" For answer the woman pointed to the distant horizon where a few indistinct blots were barely discernible. "It sailed before sunrise," said the woman. "I came to see it off because the great commander Simon honored our family by taking my daughter Agariste with him as his bride." End of chapter 27. Read by Brian Fullen, Plano, Texas, May 2025.
Chapter 28 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. The Hand of Fate. Before he mounts the hill, I know he cometh quickly. From below, sweet gales, as from deep gardens, blow before him, striking on my brow. Tennyson. Days lengthened into weeks, and weeks into months. The fate of Corinna had lost none of its horror, but time had mollified the poignancy of the tragedy. Zopyrus still served as secretary to Pasicles, and in his spare moments he wrote a series of essays entitled Memoirs of the Persian Court, which he intended to present to the great Eleusis as an aid to that poet in his poem, the Perse, upon which he was working. Considering himself to be unworthy because of his secret passion for the daughter of Eleusis, he had for some weeks delayed speaking to Eumetis upon the subject of marriage. But one bright afternoon in March, when the bird winds blew across Attica from the Mediterranean, he asked her to join him in a stroll to the Acropolis. She gladly consented, and together they sauntered along the winding street westward toward the hill which rose in majesty before them, the pride of every loyal Athenian. "Let us rest on yonder moss-covered ledge," suggested Eumetis, as they neared the eastern end of the Acropolis. "Later we can ascend." "No, no," exclaimed Zopyrus hastily, recognizing the very place where he had seen Corinna and the base creature who had accompanied her. "Let us to the theatre of Dionysus, where we sat together and witnessed the capture of Miletus. It was there you first—" But he could not conclude the sentence, and walked along by Eumetis' side, his eyes downcast with shame that his tongue had faltered just at the moment when he desired to bring up the subject of their betrothal. They entered the eastern gate of the theatre, and before them rose the stone seats, tier upon tier, dazzling white in the heat of the sun. They were impressed by the awful silence which here reigned supreme. What a vast difference between the theatre now and as it was on that day when thousands of spectators had thronged its gates and had sat in gala attire upon its benches. Then it had surged with human life. Now the only living things visible were occasional lizards darting in and out of crevices. Zopyrus and Eumetis, without a word, but with a mutual impulse, sought the section of seats at the head of which stood the statue of Aphrodite. For some moments they sat in silence with eyes fixed upon the stage as if before them they saw again enacted the great play of Phrynichus. But her hand did not touch his arm as upon that former occasion. There existed an inexplicable estrangement, and Zopyrus, as he noticed her pensive mood revealed in her pale features, was smitten with remorse that he had neglected and undoubtedly wounded her. "Eumetis," he said softly, "do not think that I've been wilfully neglectful of you. Much has occurred to turn our minds from our happiness. Will you now once again set the date for our wedding?" There was no response from Eumetis. He seized her hands, which lay passively folded in her lap. They were cold. Her attitude was listless. "Speak, Eumetis," the youth implored with growing alarm. "Have I offended you?" At his words of entreaty, the girl turned her face toward him and smiled, but not as a maiden would smile at her lover, but as a mother would gaze upon a beloved but wilful son. "You have not offended me, Zopyrus, and I sincerely hope that what I am about to say will not hurt you. Do you believe, my friend, that I honor you most highly?" He nodded affirmatively, and she continued, her thoughtful, sincere eyes resting upon him contemplatively. "Then I will tell you why I have seemed strange. I love Polygnotus, who returns my affection, and, but for the fear of wounding you, a friend whom he holds most dear, would wed me now at any time." The stage, the theatre, the Acropolis, and even the fleecy clouds floating dreamily above seemed to whirl about in a colourless eddy. Only the eyes of Eumetis remained stationary. At one moment they seemed to be accusing eyes, at another reproachful, then pitying, but his last impression of them was that they portrayed peace and happiness. His conscience would not permit him to play the heroically sacrificing lover, nor did he really experience any elation because of his freedom. He simply clasped her hand and murmured, "I understand." She looked at him quickly with a questioning glance as they rose and turned their faces homeward. Before they reached the western limit of the agora, the familiar figure of Polygnotus suddenly turned from a side street and came toward them. Zopyrus imagined that a fleeting expression of pain passed over the artist's kindly face at sight of them. "Eumetis has something important to say to you," said Zopyrus, laying a hand on his friend's shoulder as the three met. "It is only good news," he added at the startled look of inquiry upon Polygnotus's face. "Then I shall be glad to hear it. But will you not join us on our homeward way, Zopyrus?" asked the artist as Zopyrus turned to leave. "Not for the present," Zopyrus replied evasively. Then, moved by a sudden impulse, he seized a hand of Polygnotus and of Eumetis in each of his. He desired to invoke the blessing of the gods upon this couple whom he loved so dearly, but so deeply was he affected that he was unable to speak, and turned his back in the direction of the theatre, scarcely realizing what he was doing. Before reaching the Acropolis, he turned northward, pursuing as direct a course as possible along the winding, closely built streets, till at last the dwellings became more interspersed with garden plots, and finally, between two spreading acacias, he spied the massive masonry of the Dipylon Gate. He turned back for one last look at the Acropolis. There it stood in its solitary grandeur, its ruined temples resembling a circlet of irregular pearls. Although this was the 5th time that he had passed through the great gate and along the sacred way, never until now had he known that this road led to the girl he loved. Unmindful of the scorching rays of the sun which beat down upon him, he pressed on, thinking only of the goal. When, however, he was overtaken by a farmer in a cart who was returning to his farm near Eleusis after leaving his produce at the Athenian market, he gladly accepted an offer to ride. The sun was approaching the horizon a little to the left of the travellers, and stretching into the distance were the fertile fields which the driver designated as his own. "Here's where I live, my friend, but I can drive you on to Eleusis if you wish," said the farmer. "I would prefer to walk from here on," replied Zopyrus hastily, "but I am truly grateful to you for driving me this far on my journey." He bade the man a friendly farewell, and with eyes alight with anticipation, set forth to cover the remaining 2 miles which lay between him and the abode of the girl he loved. In the garden that was divided from the Temple of Mysteries only by an ivy-covered wall, reclined Persephone upon a cushion-covered seat by the fountain. She did not sleep, but lay fully conscious with her hands upon her bosom as it rose and fell regularly with her breathing. Her whole frame was wrapped in languor, but her face was not as expressive of peace as her body, for an occasional frown puckered her smooth brow, and she opened her eyes with a wistful expression, only to close them again as if to shut out the reality of her loneliness. Between 2 cypress trees, the white roof of the temple showed the first rosy tinge that followed the passing of Phoebus Apollo. Persephone rose to a sitting posture. A figure in white had passed the gate and was coming toward her along the flower-bordered path. With a cry, she sprang from her bench and ran into the outstretched arms of her lover. "What of Eumetis?" she asked, attempting to draw away from the arms that encircled her. "Eumetis has found happiness in the love of Polygnotus." It was inevitable that the artist could be such a frequent visitor at the house of Pasicles, and not grow to love the sincere, unselfish, pure daughter who lives there. "Oh, Persephone, have I your forgiveness for the death of your brother?" asked the young man with growing agitation. The maiden's face lit up with a divine radiance as she said, "My brother Pheles, clad as I last saw him with helmet, cuirass, and greaves, and carrying his sword, quiver, and shield, appeared to me in a dream, and told me not to hold you guilty of his death. He praised you highly, Zopyrus, and then he said one more thing." "And what was that?" questioned her lover eagerly. "He said, 'There is but one God who controls and directs the universe.' That's all he said. I would have asked him more, but he vanished. Then the prayer to God saved Greece at Salamis, and incessant prayers to the one God have given me, you, Persephone." She raised her lips to his as they stood together before the statue of Ceres, whose maternal countenance seemed to smile down benignly upon them, despite their words concerning the deity. There was one other witness to that kiss, a man of middle age, with thick waving hair and beard of chestnut brown, who came forth from the house, and unobserved stood with arms outstretched towards the two, as if pronouncing a benediction. End of chapter 28, read by Sandra in Canada, 2025.
Chapter 29 of Persephone of Eleusis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Christine Rucker. Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Chapter 29, After 20 Years. How terrible is time, his solemn years, the tombs of all our hopes and all our fears. In silent horror roll the gorgeous throne, the pillared arch, the monumental stone, melt in swift ruin and of mighty climes, where fame told tales of virtues and of crimes, where wisdom taught and valor woke to strife, and art's creations breathed their mimic life. And the young poet, when the stars shone high, drank the deep rapture of the quiet sky. Naught now remains but nature's placid scene, heaven's deathless blue, and earth's eternal green. Winthrop Mackworth prayed. To Themistocles in Magnesia, greetings from Zopyrus at Gela in Sicily. After a silence of many years, I write you again of affairs of state and even of many personal things which I know will be of interest to you. I want to assure you, my friend, that I have never doubted your true loyalty to Athens, and I write you freely knowing that Greece is dearer to you than Persia. Your memory is and always will be in the hearts of the majority, for who can forget the glories of Salamis and the hero to whom we owe that victory? Would that you could once more behold Athens, our Athens, and yet not as she was in the years that you, my dear friend, walked her streets, stood in her buzzing mart, or ascended her divine hill. The crystalline air, the song of the nightingale in the olive trees, the shaggy peak of Hymettus, the blue of the bay, and the familiar rose-tinted rock of the Acropolis, these the Persian has been unable to destroy. Your once hated rival, Aristides, is dead. I know that though bitter enmity once filled your heart, you will regret to hear that he died so poor that he was buried at the public expense. After his death, Cimon became undisputed leader, and greatly has Athens been benefited by the rule of this brilliant man, whom we knew well as a youth. But alas, for the brevity of popular favor. But a few years ago, he was ostracized by the most talked of man in all Athens today, Pericles, son of Xanthippus. On the eve of the battle of Tanagra, Cimon left his place of banishment and fought bravely with the Athenians against the Spartans. This so pleased Pericles that he proposed a measure recalling Cimon from exile, and it was passed by the assembly. Cimon has succeeded in putting down many revolts, and you know of his great victory over the Persians in Asia. From the proceeds of the spoils of this battle, he had planned to build a temple to Athena, but this work is being carried on by Pericles. It is plain that Cimon, however sincerely he had the welfare of his city at heart, was too fond of personal praise and worship. He failed in his attempt to unite Athens and Sparta. Pericles stands for the independence of Athens and for pure democracy. During the Thasian revolt about 10 years ago, Mnemosychus distinguished himself by bravery, but he confided to us that he did not relish the task of overseeing the Thasians tear down their walls at the command of the Athenians, for his brother-in-law, Polygnotus, was a native of Thasos. Mnemosychus is now at Aegina, helping to suppress a similar revolt. And now I will tell you of Polygnotus. He and other artists adorn the interior of the painted porch with mural pictures of great beauty representing scenes from the myths and from recent history. Polygnotus married Eumetis, the daughter of Pasicles, and to this union were born 3 daughters, Corinna, Cleodice, and Neobule. Pasicles resides with his daughter and her husband, but his wife Cleodice, whose health failed rapidly after the death of her daughter Corinna, died within a few years after that tragic event. I know it will interest you to hear of Ladice and Lysimachus, both of whom spoke of you affectionately whenever we met while in Athens. Their son Aristides, in whom they feel the usual pride common to parents of an only child, gives promise of exceptional ability along the lines of his grandfather, and if I may say so, his foster grandparent. Yesterday I stood at a newly made grave on the banks of a river which pours its waters into the African Sea. In the distance to the north stretched the wheat-bearing land of Gela. Before I could give my thoughts wholly to the honored dead, I gazed with pride and happiness upon the family with which I have been blessed. My eldest son Phalus stood by my side, stalwart of body and thoughtful of mind, not unlike his grandfather Aeschylus. Persephone, our eldest daughter, is very like her mother was at her age, so it is needless to mention here the pride I feel in her. My second son, Mecistius, at times reminds me of my father, Artaphernes, but the loving guidance of his mother has softened the severity that was his grandfather's. My youngest child, the daughter, Protomache, stood upon this occasion with tears in her usually laughing eyes. She clung tightly to the hand of her mother, whose eyes rested lovingly upon each member of the little group in turn. Then, in low tones, with head bent in a reverent attitude, Persephone, my dear wife, read this epitaph which was engraved upon the tomb. This tomb the dust of Aeschylus doth hide, Ephorion's son and fruitful Gela's pride. How famed his valor Marathon may tell, and long-haired Medes who knew it all too well. As the last word trembled into a silence that seemed to permeate nature all about us, a few lines that had been composed by Aeschylus on the subject of death came to my mind, and I could not but repeat them upon this occasion. Smitten by him from towering hopes degraded, mortals lie low and still. Tireless and effortless works forth its will, the arm divine. God from his holy seat, in calm of unarmed power, brings forth the deed at its appointed hour. The end. End of chapter 29. End of Persephone of Eleusis by Claire Winger Harris. Recording by Christine Rucker, April 12th, 2025, Westford, Massachusetts.